We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market stocks were up today, on track to post weekly gains. Investor sentiment was upbeat on the back of progress in trade talks between the U.S. and China. Now, on the continent, South Africa's JSE closing the week on a positive note. Two stocks to watch today were computer hardware seller Mustec and Northam Platinum. Now, Mustec rose about 7.4% on news that net profit grew about 32%. Northam rose 3.6% after releasing its interim results, which showed a 49% jump in revenue. In Nigeria, FMCGs like Cadbury, Nigerian breweries were a drag on the oil share today. They fell about 9.57% and 3% respectively. Now, also coming up on the show today, more than 40 leaders from the EU and Arab states converge in Egypt to talk trade and regional security. And Zimbabwe's central bank governor guilty of prejudice when exchanging exporters' US dollar earnings. Also coming up, fresh data from Europe shows inflation in the Eurozone has edged up. Well, let's start off the show in Egypt, where 24 presidents and prime ministers from the European Union and members of the Arab League will be converging in Sharm el-Sheikh for the first ever EU-Arab League summit. Now, the summit will be chaired jointly by European Council President Donald Tusk and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. UK Prime Minister Theresa May will meanwhile hold bilateral meetings with EU leaders at the summit. Arab and European leaders will seek to strengthen Arab-European ties and address a wide range of issues and common challenges, including migration, border security, and trade between the two major blocs. Let's delve further into the expectations for that summit with Adel El Maroui. He joins us now in Cairo. Adel, welcome to the show. Now, of course, this summit does come as each side is struggling with their own individual challenges. The EU, of course, is divided over Brexit. Arab League unity is in trouble right now, with many members still feeling the effects of those 2011 revolutions. So what are the expectations, Adel, in terms of fruitful talks at this summit?
Uche, this is part of a memorandum that was signed in 2015 between the League of Arab States, which include 22 members of Arab-speaking nations in North Africa and in Asia, specifically in the Gulf and the northern part up to Iraq. And since then, the main mission has been to create sort of a platform between Europe and this Arab world, which both of them, of course, are very close neighbors. They only have the Mediterranean Sea separating them. So we're talking about huge possibilities in terms of political challenges, even environmental challenges in the Mediterranean itself. That's beside security threats that could arise from, as you've mentioned, the instabilities that the Arab world have been quite suffering from since 2011. All of this means that the EU needs close partnership and to enhance the collaboration with the Arab world. And that's why they have been trying to put this summit together. This is the first time it takes place here in Egypt, and it is, of course, one of the rarest opportunities to see leaders from both worlds, the European Union and the Arab League, come together to open and discuss all these files openly.
Now, as mentioned, Adele, we expect illegal immigration and certainly terrorism to be two key issues discussed at the summit. Of course, the issues are of mutual interest. But of course, EU leaders are still struggling to bridge divisions on migration specifically. How do you see this impacting the discussions this weekend?
It is definitely leading the discussions. There has been great progress in the past couple of years. The number of illegal migrants flowing into Europe has significantly dropped, yet it still is going on. And right now we are in the winter season in this part of the world, but when it starts becoming warmer, there is huge expectation that the flow of migrants will go to a peak once again. Egypt has been quite a strong partner to the EU in that regard. There have been collaboration on these aspects with Libya as well, which is the main source of the influx of illegal migrants to Europe. It is an alarming situation in Europe because, as you said, there is division among European Union members about how to deal with these illegal migrants. On the other hand, there is a huge security risk as they breach the borders, not just for Europe, but even within the North African countries. The illegal migration in general has been a key source of the entrance of militants into these countries. We've seen terrorist attacks in Europe, in Egypt, in Libya, in Tunisia, you name it, of course. And this has been the key factor that unites all of them, is trying to counter terrorism. And this part of it includes illegal migration, although it's not the main source of terrorism, but it is part of spreading it around the region.
Now, of course, officials are insisting that this gathering will be about much more than the issue of migration and, of course, security. But some skeptics are asking how much progress we will see on issues around trade, investment, amongst others. What are your thoughts on what's going to happen in those areas?
The picture is actually not so optimistic. Since 2014, the volume of trade between the Arab world in general and Europe has been significantly dropping. From 2014 to 2016, we've seen, especially with the Gulf countries, we've seen a sharp drop, 15% every year, a drop in the volume of trade between the Gulf countries and Europe specifically. In the last 2 years, it has been recovering a bit, but not as much as expected. Back in 2018, both worlds, Europe and the Arab world, were very hopeful to reach a free zone, a European Arab free zone. That has crashed, and since then they've been trying to revive these effects of the negotiations, because it has poured into the volume of trade, as I told you earlier, dropping it quite significantly, and therefore they have a huge challenge about how to enhance this. Some countries like Egypt and other European and North African countries like Morocco, for instance, have very strong relations with Europe. In general, Europe is the largest trade partner to the Arab world to date, as a collaborative work, not as per country. While the Arab world represents roughly less than 6% of the entire trade volume for Europe in general. So there is a huge opportunities to expand, and there is desire actually from both sides to do it, but how to put it in shape is quite challenging. Just recently here in Egypt, the EU successfully managed to reach the zero tariffs on its vehicles, but there are still many challenges ahead in terms of other forms of taxation. It's not just in Egypt, it's in the rest of the Arab world as well. And this is what many of the economic experts and ministers who will be attending will be trying to resolve.
Now, of course, EU officials have confirmed that about 25 European heads of state and government will be attending that summit, including Britain's Theresa May and, of course, Germany's Merkel. Who are the Arab leaders we can expect at this summit this weekend?
Well, so far we have an official confirmation from the Lebanese Prime Minister Al-Hariri, who will be attending. There are a number of prime ministers from the Arab world who will be joining as well. But the exact figure and who from the Arab world will be attending has not been released yet, officially at least. It doesn't seem that we're seeing a lot of Arab leaders, at least so far. By Saturday, we will have a clearer picture as the negotiations and the summit will begin on Sunday evening in Cairo time and will extend up till Monday.
Well, many thanks, Adel, for that update. Of course, we know you'll be bringing us updates from that conference as it progresses. Adel El Maroui joining us there in Cairo. Well, let's stay in the region. Let's head to Tunisia now, where the board of the central bank of the country has raised its key interest rate by 100 basis points. Now, the rate went up for the first time in March 2018 by about 75 basis points, and then again in June from 5.75% to 6.75%. The central bank has also expressed strong concern about the inflation outlook. Here's CGTN's Adnan Ashaushi with more.
The Central Bank of Tunisia has decided to raise its key interest rate by 100 basis points for the third time in a row. bringing it from 6.75 to 7.75%. The governor predicted a fall in the inflation rate to less than 7% at the end of 2019.
Without this action, the cost of inaction would have been very high. Inflation would have been even higher or even double-digit. The rise in inflation is pushing real interest rates even more into negative territory and causes a decrease in the real cost, which favors the acceleration of bank loans and consumer demand that can only exacerbate inflationary pressures.
Al-Abbasi stressed the independence of the central bank from the government, the finance ministry and parliament.
I had not consulted any government or professional party before raising key interest rates. It is a sovereign decision by the central bank's board. Our responsibility is to defend the purchasing power of the citizen by avoiding double-digit inflation rates.
The central bank's announcement has caused uproar in Tunisia. Consumer protection organizations have raised concern after the executive board of the bank made the decision to raise its key interest rate by 100 basis points. Experts pointed out that the increase in the key interest rate adds to the burden of companies and blocks investment and growth. It also depletes the already deteriorated purchasing power of citizens.
We're already surviving. The central bank has decided to condemn millions of Tunisians to poverty. Bank loans, mortgage, services and everything is more expensive. This is unacceptable.
Tunisian Premier Youssef Achahed said his government respects the decisions of the Central Bank of Tunisia, which is an independent institution, but works at the same time to avoid any negative impact of the rise in the key interest rate on the recovery of the investment dynamic. Professional organizations and trade unions have rejected the central bank's decision, while the House of the People's Representatives gears up for a hearing session with the bank governor next Monday. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And meanwhile, South African mobile telecom giant MTN may once again find itself in hot water, this time over possible bribe dating back 14 years. Now, the case involves the awarding of mobile operating licenses in Iran. An Iranian operating license was awarded to Turkcell in 2005, but the decision was reversed in MTN's favor. Now, while MTN set up its network in Iran, Turkcell filed a $4.2 billion lawsuit. Here's Suitra Naidu with more.
A few days ago, the Hawks Special Investigating Unit arrested South Africa's former ambassador to Iran. Yusuf Saluji allegedly earned around $100,000 for facilitating a bribe to ensure MTN won the bid to set up a mobile network in Iran.
Let's assume that the South African courts end up ruling that MTN was indeed involved in corrupt activities, therefore it did not obtain the license rightfully. South Africa doesn't have any jurisdiction over Iran. So the Iranian government would take that into consideration and then decide, do they actually find merit in this? Do they want to conduct their own investigation? Or do they just leave it as is?
MTN just settled a hefty $53 million fine with Nigeria in January this year for transferring money out of the country without the central bank's knowledge. Nigeria is MTN's most profitable country in Africa, while Iran has grown into MTN's second biggest market. It has a 49% stake in Irancell with over 43 million subscribers.
In Iran, MTN isn't seen like how it is seen at times in Nigeria, as a company that is abusive of tax regulations and is looking for loopholes. It's actually well regarded. And also in this current sanctions atmosphere, it's very unlikely that Iran's going to kick out one of its key investors.
President Cyril Ramaphosa was the chair of MTN's board at the time of the alleged bribe. His role is also being brought into question.
The task of the board is to provide a strategic direction for a company and assist with formulating future overarching strategy. So I think it will be very difficult for President Ramaphosa to be held accountable for what was happening with MTN in Iran at the time. just because he was probably too removed from the actual events that were taking place.
The case is still being investigated and it's not yet clear if there was any wrongdoing by MTN. The Johannesburg-based mobile operator has repeatedly refuted claims of underhandedness in obtaining its operating license in Iran. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And Uganda's plan to start a national airline could be realized sooner than expected. The local transport ministry confirms that test flights for the new aircrafts are underway at the Bombardier facility in Montreal, Canada. Now, the country has also sent about 8 pilots to Bombardier for training ahead of the comeback of Ugandan Airlines. CGTN's Michael Baleke reporting.
The first aircraft of the revived Uganda Airlines is expected to arrive in the country in just weeks. 4 Bombardier Sierra J900 series will form the core of the national carrier's regional fleet.
We rely on Kenya Airways and others. So that money we are giving away is going to be saved. Number 2, in regard to employment, our own people are going to be employed.
According to the Ugandan government, the national airline, which is fondly remembered as the Flying Crane, will start with flights to Nairobi, followed by Kigali, Johannesburg and Juba. There are also plans to open up additional routes to Mombasa, Khartoum, Mogadishu and Kinshasa, among others. Uganda has not had an airline for the last 18 years after the national carrier was liquidated in 2001, and there are fears that the revived Uganda Airlines may immediately join a list of African carriers struggling to break even. A recent report by the International Air Transport Association suggests that punitive taxes, high infrastructure and fuel costs are curtailing the benefits of air transport on the African continent.
We have seen Etihad closing its routes to Uganda because they are not commercially viable. We have seen British Airways closing because the routes are not commercially viable. Key airlines, KQ, Kenya Airlines, it is struggling with the massive government bailouts.
This week, South African Airways announced a restructuring plan to save the airline from sinking in debt. But Ugandan authorities argue the national airline will be supported through a public-private partnership, and the revival of Uganda Airlines will significantly boost Uganda's trade in the global market and facilitate travel and tourism. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And now look at some other corporate headlines today. In Kenya, members of parliament have suspended a proposed merger between Kenyan Airways and the Kenyan Airports Authority. Now, the Public Investments Committee said the proposed merger will render the profitable aviation regulator, KAA, bankrupt. The prolonged delay of the merger puts Kenya Airways in a precarious financial position and has less than 1 year to survive should the merger fail. Meanwhile, South Africa's Cell C's CEO, Jose dos Santos, will step down on March 1st. This, of course, comes as the firm's 45% owner, Blue Label Telecoms, is scheduled to release its interim results. Now, dos Santos will take on a new role as consultant to Cell C chair, Kuben Pillay. And back in Kenya, British personal care products manufacturer PZ Cussons has launched a fresh marketing bid. The firm, which is the owner of the Imperial Leather brand, plans on capturing a bigger market share in the competitive Kenyan toilet soap segment. The marketing campaign is expected to cost the company nearly $300,000. And Nike is in damage control mode after Duke University forward basketball phenomenon Zion Williamson suffered a knee injury when his shoe shredded during a marquee game. Now, Nike, whose shares were down 1% in early trading in New York, said it was trying to figure out what had happened. Well, Nike, which has a 12-year exclusive contract to supply Duke with shoes and other gear, is engaged in an ongoing battle with rivals Adidas and Under Armour for the loyalty of top sports stars. And that's a look at some of our corporate headlines. Well, we're heading into a short break now, still to come. Zimbabwe's central bank governor guilty of prejudice when exchanging exporters' US dollar earnings. And Somalia launches a massive road rehabilitation project.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Uche Okoronkwo. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Let's head to Zimbabwe now, where the governor of the Reserve Bank, Dr. John Mangudia, has admitted that he prejudiced exporters by taking their money at an unfavorable rate when the parallel markets were at about 400% a premium. The Southern African state's bond note was set at a ratio of 1-to-1 with the US dollar back in 2016 when it was introduced. Now, the governor's self-incrimination follows the bank's introduction of a new currency known as the RTGS dollars in an attempt to ease the nation's cash crunch crisis. Now, the new currency is expected to begin trading at around 2.5 to the US dollar as Zimbabwean banks reopen in the country. And to Senegal now, where President Macky Sall is seeking re-election on a Sunday, touting one of the highest economic growth rates in West Africa and the completion of gleaming new infrastructure. Well, since assuming office in 2012, Macky Sall has managed to attract billions of dollars in investment. Projects such as highways, an express train for commuters, and a new international airport in a city that's being built from scratch to ease congestion in the capital, Dakar, feature prominently in his re-election campaign.
President Macky Sall is considered a favorite contender in the upcoming elections. He has modernized the economy, and this has propelled him to the top tier. Despite this, he faces critics who are against his petition for a second term.
The electoral cards that they're distributing are the cards of fraud. It's for fraud. If you see fraud, you must burn it. So your electoral cards, you need to pile them all somewhere and set them on fire.
President Sall is facing 4 contenders in the first round of voting after 2 of Senegal's best-known opposition figures were ruled out because of corruption convictions. Rights groups have termed this an attempt to crack down on dissent in the country.
I am hoping for a change in the management of the state at the level of transparency. We have high expectations. If there was more transparency, we could forgive everything else, the lack of means and everything else. In terms of transparency, We cannot put up with what there is. We all have to contribute with our taxes and state funds. And then when there is a need to use the money for important things, we don't know where it's gone.
A widely cited survey conducted by a Senegalese data company in November gave Sall 45% support. None of the other candidates had more than 16%. His main challenges are former Prime Minister Idrissa Seck and political rookie Ousmane Sonko. Many voters and foreign backers are applauding the boost in economic growth to over 60%. But frustration with the incumbent is noticeable among the educated youth who are struggling to find jobs in an economy based on exports in agriculture.
Education is fundamental for a country and its development, and Senegal's education system suffers because students are graded towards the private sector. They are suffering. The state needs to review its policy on education.
More than 6.5 million people are registered to vote, with polls opening on Sunday at 8 a.m. and closing at 6 p.m. If no candidate secures a majority in the first round, the top two will face each other in a second round on March 24th. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
And in Somalia, authorities have embarked on an enormous project of renovating key roads destroyed during Somalia's long period of a civil war. Now, the project is being funded by Qatar government, which has become a major development financier for the federal government of Somalia. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo reports on the latest.
The construction project will be implemented in two regions that border the capital, Mogadishu. For more than 2 decades, conflict has destroyed basic infrastructure in a city with a population of close to 3 million people. Public transport vehicles charge more for long hours spent on the road from Afgoye and Johar. Drivers and commuters say the government has failed to improve infrastructure in a region widely considered as the breadbasket of the nation.
We want authorities to renovate and reopen the highways to cater for the huge trucks that ferry goods to and from the port. Rickshaw drivers also have a hard time due to the poor state of the roads in and around the city.
Some of the city roads have been renovated and are in good shape. We want the same for the other roads. We want the business community and the government to work together so as to ensure roads are renovated not just for us, but for the future generation.
Turkish engineers will now commence renovation on a 30-kilometer stretch of road from Afgoye to Mogadishu and a 90-kilometer project linking Johar and Mogadishu that will be funded by the Qatari government.
The construction phase will commence for the Mogadishu-Afgoye road that will be followed very soon by a similar project linking Mogadishu and Johar. Qatar will fund both projects through the Qatar Fund for the Development of Somalia.
Prime Minister Hassan Ali Khaire laid the foundation stone for the multi-million-dollar project that was signed at the end of 2017 in line with the Somali government's agenda of improving basic infrastructure.
This is a great day for traders, farmers and locals from both sides of Shabelle River who will have easy access to the city. This project started less than 2 years ago and we hope to complete it in the next coming months.
Officials say the project will also create economic growth and job creation, especially in the agricultural sector. It will also reduce insecurity in a region that has been too often a target for militant group with roadside bombs mostly planted, targeting African Union troops and Somali army personnel. Civilians have also been recent victims of these deadly blasts that mostly target government troops while on the move. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Meanwhile, authorities in South Africa are hoping Cape Town's reputation as a global business destination will be strengthened with the expansion of the Cape Town International Convention Centre. The size of the facility does hamper its ability to host multiple events simultaneously, while CGTN's Travis Andrews explores.
For more than 16 years, the Cape Town International Convention Centre has been a massive boon for the local economy and has held over 7,000 events since it's opened its doors. Now, the completion of the facility's expansion program is set to further boost its attempts to position itself as the world's best long-haul international convention centre by 2020. The convention center hosts a number of large-scale events throughout the year, including the annual mining in Durban, which alone contributed over $45 million to the local economy.
Last year, Cape Town was awarded with the Events Capital Award, and so therefore it's important for us to continue positioning Cape Town as a destination of choice for travel and trade. And conferencing is a big part of our city's economy, and so in the last few years, some of the signature events that our city hosted contributed 3 to 6 billion rand to our regional economy.
That income is derived from what delegates spend on hotels, restaurants and tours, and the future expansion of Cape Town's airport is likely to see an influx of even more bookings.
With the upgrading of the Cape Town International Airport, we expect to bring in many more direct flights, because again, it's about the ease of travel. And so with a new runway, which is going to be 3.5 kilometers long, it will be able to accommodate for A380 aircraft. Those are the type of infrastructure that you need to grow the demand, and that makes business sense.
For many years now, the facility has been forced to turn down some conference requests over lack of space, which ultimately led to a loss in revenue, but that is likely to change. The convention center's expansion came at a cost of over $50 million and has 2 new connecting sky bridges, which will enable to host concurrent events simultaneously. Local stakeholders believe tapping into the burgeoning Asian market will be key in establishing the mother city as the best long-haul conference destination in the future.
What we're seeing is a definite trend of a slower growth out of what we call our traditional European markets and fast growth out of Asia and the Middle East. So in terms of China, we're going on the SAT China Roadshow, where we engage with operators in market. We've got 4 bid presentations in China to land big conferences, and then we're continuously looking at different ways of marketing there.
And the China Premium Taxi is just one event which showed just how much growth potential the Chinese conferencing market may possess, and will be key in exploring as the Cape Town International Convention Center repositions itself for the next 20 years of growth and economic development. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's a look at what's coming up after this short break. Fresh data from Europe shows inflation in the Eurozone is edging up. And investors remain upbeat over cryptocurrencies despite emerging risk.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now here's a recap of today's top headlines. Nigeria's Independent National Electoral Commission is making final preparations for the national elections. INEC has briefed its officers and dispatched voting materials to tens of thousands of polling stations across the country. Well, large numbers of Nigerians are also traveling for the second time in a week to cast their votes. This is the third straight election to be pushed to a later date. And Senegal, too, is preparing for elections this weekend. Incumbent President Macky Sall is seen as the front-runner. Sall has been described as an economic reformist under whose leadership Senegal has witnessed massive infrastructure developments. While Amnesty International has called for authorities in the country to take measures to ensure that the presidential election is held in a climate that is free of violence. And the outgoing United Nations representative to the Central African Republic is now calling for support for the recently signed peace deal. In his last briefing to the UN Security Council before stepping down, Parfait Onanga Anyanga said the peace deal is a turning point for the nation. He also urged all parties to honor all their commitments and engage in dialogue, not violence. And the United Nations has expressed concern over the food situation in South Sudan. The UN says the hunger situation has reached alarming levels. It also says nearly two-thirds of the country is experiencing severe hunger. Now, the South Sudanese government and aid agencies are now appealing for more support to avert a potential catastrophe. And that's a recap of today's headlines. And on the international front, fresh data from the European Statistics Authority shows that inflation in the Eurozone edges up in January on the back of higher service prices. Now, the Consumer Inflation Index grew about 1.4% in the first of this year. That's lower than the 1.5% increase which was seen in December. The decrease was due mostly to a slowdown in the annual growth of energy prices. The core Consumer Inflation Index rose 1.1% in January, accelerating from December's 0.9%. Now, Eurostat says the biggest upward push for consumer prices came from the service sector. Meanwhile, Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney has announced that new legislation was being ushered in to prepare for a no-deal Brexit. Coveney said that he hopes the legislation could turn out to be redundant, but he also warned of an all-lose situation in a no-deal scenario.
Maintaining the things that work so well today, but let me be very clear in saying a disorderly Brexit will be a lose, lose, lose for the UK, for the EU and for Ireland. We cannot offset all of the damage that it will do, but we are doing everything that we can through legislation, through preparation, through investment, through information and through support of the multiple sectors and the multiple numbers of people that will be impacted potentially by that worst-case scenario.
Now, of course, as the Brexit deadline fast approaches, the threat of a no-deal divorce looms larger by the day. Many foreign firms are taking precautionary measures. Honda says it wants to close its only auto plant in the country. The Japanese car maker says the decision is not related to Brexit, but as CGTN's Jin Yang Chiao explains, there are those who have their doubts.
It's Honda's only plant in the European Union, but its days are numbered. The Japanese car giant says their Swindon facility in southwest England was shut down in 2021. Honda says it's part of a shift from diesel-guzzling engines to greener electric vehicles. But Britain's leaders are not impressed. Prime Minister Theresa May expressed her disappointment to Honda's president. Business Secretary Greg Clark called the decision devastating. Even opposition Labour Party chief Jeremy Corbyn had this to say about the loss of jobs.
That is devastating news for those workers, for their families, and for the local economy that has been generated largely around that plant and other new industries that have moved in following the collapse of the railway industry.
Back in Tokyo, Honda's president told reporters the move was not related to Brexit, but some disagree.
It's hard to believe that Brexit isn't at least a part of it, because from my discussions with a number of very prominent Japanese investors, they're concerned that after Brexit, there will be obstacles to their exchanges with the European Union.
And Honda is not alone. Earlier this month, Nissan axed plans in the Brexit-backing city of Sunderland, citing business reasons, but also uncertainty over Brexit. Sony, Panasonic, and Hitachi are also scaling back their operations in the UK. Faber has seen the Bank of England slash its 2019 forecast for UK economic growth by 0.5 percentage point, blaming the downgrade on a global slowdown and the fog of Brexit. But those clouds of fog may yet have a silver lining for British workers. The latest data shows wage growth maintained its fastest pace in a decade in late 2018. Unemployment, meanwhile, remained at 4%, its lowest since 1975. Nevertheless, analysts agree that the business environment has deteriorated since the start of the new year. So Brexit's full effects may still need time before they surface. Jane Chow, CGTN.
Well, let's move on now to cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. The two have received lots of interest worldwide in recent months. Volatility and some security concerns make cryptocurrencies risky investments, but still many people around the world are jumping on board. While CGTN's Mikhail Bardavid has more from the Blockchain Economy Istanbul Summit.
The Blockchain Economy Istanbul Summit was held on February 20th with a full day of presentations from dozens of international experts. Turkish and foreign investors, banking officials, entrepreneurs, and professionals working in the financial industry participated in the summit. Presenters here focused on the current and future trends of the cryptocurrency market and blockchain technology, while also addressing some global challenges as well. One session by Wall Street analyst Tom Lee described the revolution of the finance system, while another tried to describe why capital markets really need blockchain. Over the past few years, global large institutions and corporations have begun cooperating with blockchain projects. Some experts in the field of cryptocurrency, such as Cal Evans, says decentralization is critical for the survival of such companies.
We're starting to see this trickle of modern companies starting to get up to date with the new technology. And if they fail to do it, the larger institutions really will fall a death to decentralization, because ultimately things are always done at the cheapest possible price. And decentralization enables things to be done very cheaply and very effectively. And so that's why these organizations would need to catch up.
But there are risks and challenges in cryptocurrencies. The market is extremely volatile. Bitcoin, the first major cryptocurrency, soared to peak at around $20,000 per coin in December 2017 and has stumbled to around $4,000 in the first few months of 2019. Evans points out that one of the challenges cryptocurrencies face is related to perception.
The perception in some countries is that cryptocurrencies are bad because people trust their money either being run, maintained or monitored by some kind of centralized power. However, if we take a step back and we realize that the introduction of banks and financial institutions is a relatively new thing, people used to deal directly with each other for the longest of times.
Despite the risks involved, millions of citizens around the world have invested in cryptocurrencies. According to a report published by ING Bank, Turks are among the most interested, with over 18% of adults stating they own some cryptocurrency. BTC Turk is Turkey's first and the world's fourth crypto buying platform. The company's CEO, Özgür Güneri, says the platform has over 100,000 active members, most of whom are men aged between 25 to 40.
According to a research we conducted with Istanbul University, Turkish investors like to use traditional value savings tools such as gold and foreign currencies, and Bitcoin is similar in characteristics with gold and currency, which is why they prefer it.
Turks are also highly active on social media platforms such as Facebook, and the country's household internet access rose over 80% in 2018, according to the state media Anadolu Agency. Aside from warnings of challenges such as market volatility and regulations, experts speaking at the Blockchain Economy Summit in Istanbul seem to have one message in common: the future is digital. Mikhail Bardavid, CGTN, Istanbul.
Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping met with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Beijing on the last leg of his Asia tour. During the meeting, President Xi said China and Saudi Arabia have formed a comprehensive and wide-ranging relationship. He added that China sees Riyadh as a good friend and a partner. Now, the Chinese leader also lent his support to Saudi Arabia's attempts to diversify its economy. The two countries will speed up their ties in regards to Saudi's Vision 2030 and promote cooperation in high value-added industries. Saudi Arabian Crown Prince said Saudi considers China an important strategy partner. He added that Riyadh will support China's Belt and Road initiative and is more than willing to cooperate with Beijing on its future economic plans. Meanwhile, more Chinese are participating in sporting events for all kinds of reasons. And as they become more savvy with the workouts and the games, they're driving competition in the sportswear business. Mijiaye has more about the new trend.
Chinese participation in sports events has grown a lot over the past few years. You can see more and more gym and fitness centers around the city, and even free workout spaces. Lauren Hogan works for a fitness company in Shanghai and says the changes are obvious.
In the overall picture, I have noticed, the bigger push for fitness and healthier lifestyle. I mean, we see it everywhere. We read about it in the newspaper more. We see it even in the metro stations, even the parks that are the more green space that's coming along the riverside and the cycling paths and running paths.
The rising awareness of fitness issues has created huge new markets for sportswear makers. It's estimated that China's sportswear market was worth 212 billion yuan in 2018, up more than 30% from 2015. Major market players have seen corresponding strong growth in their revenue here. Nike's latest financial report shows its China sales have had double-digit growth for the last 18 consecutive quarters, while Adidas has had more than 11 quarters of sales growth of more than 20%. We've been asking around to see what Shanghai customers are looking for when they shop for sports gear these days.
In the past, I'd just grab whatever pair of sports shoes was handy and head out. But now I pay more attention to wearing something that can protect my ankles, things like that.
I love yoga, and I always see if there are any new products for yoga training. Also, I've gotten interested in outdoor activities recently, like camping, so I always shop for outdoor products. I buy gear for whatever sport I'm involved with.
That's why sports brands are focusing on rolling out more diversified products to meet growing customers' demands. Companies like Nike and Adidas are coming up with different lines of products, featuring new tech fabrics and materials. They are also adding more sub-brands to cover a wider range of customers. And despite the fact that half of the market is dominated by the top 4 brands, Nike, Adidas, Anta, and Li-Ning, the market is seeing new players, especially fashion brands and outdoor sportswear makers.
Sports and fashion are two industries that are getting quite close recently. The casual and street styles have a large impact on sportswear, and people wear them not only in gyms, but also on their daily commute. And as people are exploring new activities, for example, we've noticed fast growing interest in outdoor activities like hiking or skiing. So these brands are getting popular as well. You can even see cases where big sports retail brands have required skiing or tennis brands.
The Mintel report says that China's sportswear retail market is expected to continue to grow at an annual rate of 8% in the next 5 years, to be worth 312 billion yuan in 2023. Mi Jiayi, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Now, technology has been touted as a game changer with the introduction of 3D printing. But despite the promise, some say 3D printing has failed to deliver on its potential because it's just too slow. Well, CGTN's Mark Niu takes a look at a new tech that could help speed up the creation process in a novel way.
Traditional 3D printing happens layer by layer, but some researchers think there must be a better way.
If you could get a CT scan, a 3D object is imaged, like the body, by projecting X-rays from many, many different angles through the body and then reconstructing what is inside the body. So we thought, well, let's just reverse that idea to create objects instead of imaging them.
Researchers at the University of Berkeley, California, and Lawrence Livermore National Lab have invented a new method of 3D printing called computed axiolithography. By using a video projector to shine rays on a light-sensitive material that slowly rotates, the material absorbs energy and turns into a solid. It took just a few minutes to print this tiny replica of the famous sculpture, The Thinker.
The technology has been used to print more than 30 different objects, ranging from about 0.2 millimeters to up to 10 centimeters. Theoretically, it could be used to print much larger objects. It's already been used to print objects in a very revolutionary way.
Because we are printing the entire volume of the object at once, we can print an object around another pre-existing object. So we showed a screwdriver handle that we had printed around a pre-existing steel shaft. You could think of that principle being used to enable greater mass customization of consumer products. For example, customized grips on sporting equipment, better tools, safer tools, even potentially prosthetic devices.
We think of the replicator machine in Star Trek.
Water, cold.
Turning science fiction into reality takes a lot of math, according to the researcher who devised the computations that drive the printing process.
It's summing up the dose, the energy that you deliver from each of the angles together in order to produce the 3D object. So in our computation, we model that. We model how exactly the videos are summing up over multiple angles to produce the 3D energy distribution.
Printing an object all at once means it can do things other 3D printers can't, like creating this ball inside a cage. While it's still early days, researchers believe their technology holds great promise for industry. It can print on a wider range of substances, meaning it may someday produce sturdier mechanical parts, while also creating delicate, flexible materials that simulate biological tissue. Mark New, CGTN, Berkeley, California.
And shifting focus now, here's a look at how commodities performed today. Oil prices firm today, supported by OPEC's ongoing supply cuts. However, prices remain just below 2019 peaks, which were reached earlier this week. That's as U.S. crude oil production hit a record 12 million barrels per day, and also exports surged today. Now, gold prices holding steady, on course for its second straight weekly gain, with weak economic data from the U.S. compounding worries about a global slowdown, while of course investors await concrete signals on the U.S.-China trade talks. Well, let's take a short break now. Here's a look at what's coming up. Kenyan-based ride-hailing company Little Cab eyes Tanzania and Ghana in its latest expansion bid.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Well, let's head to Kenya now, where the chief executive of a Kenyan-based ride-hailing firm Little Cab, Kamal Budabati, says his company will be expanding to Tanzania and Ghana this year as part of plans to compete with Uber and Taxify. While the firm plans on raising about $50 million more in capital from investors. CGTN's Terry Wangari with the story.
Kenya's ride-hailing company Little will start offering rides in Tanzania's commercial capital Dar es Salaam next week and plans to launch in Accra, Ghana by May. The firm's CEO, Kamal Budabati, says the ride-hailing company is in talks with investors to raise about $50 million in series, a fundraising which it hopes to finalize by the middle of 2019.
Lily, yeah.
We are meeting a couple of investors both on the continent and in the Silicon Valley, and the interest is there. We are just trying to figure out. We are hoping that the investment should close in the course of mid of this year. That's what we are hoping.
Little, which competes with global players Uber and Taxify in Kenya, is valued at between $70 and $75 million, a minuscule number compared to its billion-dollar rivals. The firm is competing with them by offering drivers additional ways to earn an income.
Our drivers are agents. They can sell insurance for you, they can sell airtime, they can pay light water bills, they can do all those little things around that increases their income. So then if you are doing that, then you don't actually start fighting just on the price war that's happening at the moment.
The 2.5-year-old company has 10,000 drivers operating in Nairobi and over 1 million users on its platform, with more than 60% of those in Kenya. Last month, Little launched a bus service in Nairobi on its platform, on top of its taxi services and motorcycle boda boda offerings. The company is also looking into doing deliveries.
I think the middle income consumer, middle and the above, is what we feel that we are targeting. But you see, that's where also we come into the place, because we also have a product for boda boda, which is two-wheelers. And we also have a product for shuttle, which is like a mass transit platform. So if you look at it, for us consumer, because of the spread is bigger, any consumer who needs transport somewhere down the line fit in some of our products.
Little is available in Kenya for a segment of the market that doesn't have smartphones. The company worked with mobile operators and introduced a short code which allows it to identify a passenger's location and provide a ride. It plans on using its capital to invest in technology and geographical expansion to accommodate the expansion. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
Well, let's head to Nigeria now. For about 500 years, the dyers of Kano have crouched over circular pits near the mud city wall, plunging fabrics into water infused with indigo. Now, the purple cotton of Kano was once famous throughout Africa's arid Sahel belt. Now, more than 100 pits have fallen into disrepair, and many of them are clogged with refuse and stones. Here's CGTN's Brian Twisant with that story.
The last of Nigeria's dye pits. Here, in the ancient northern city of Kano, they are said to have been in operation for 5 centuries. Many now appear to be abandoned, and there is foreign competition everywhere. Founded in 1498, the Kofar Mata pits are said to be the oldest in Africa and are the only survivor of Kano's dye trade, which once included 13 pit complexes. The hand-woven local cotton is much stronger than imported machine fabrics, and many are calling for government to do more to protect the traditional industry.
So here, we have not too much technology because our idea, our government, they are not help our idea to hold our idea to do it. So normally they forget it.
Everything don't spoil, you see. Before that time, you spend for inside 1,000 while you have it. You with your family, you go another day you go use it again. And now when you get 2,000, you not go reach you. You not go reach you to go and do your family one day, even one day.
The dye pits have attracted travelers and traders from across the vast Sahel region to Kano. The fabrics are still used today by the nomadic, well-wrapped ethnic Tuareg. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Well, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand strengthening against the dollar, even as it ends a week marked by lots of speculation following the announcement of that 2019 national budget. And of course, rating agencies' reaction to that budget, which included a bleaker outlook for economic growth and debt in the country. Now, in Zimbabwe, banks have also begun trading bond notes after the government scrapped the peg between its quasi-currency bond note and the US dollar. It sold